I'm 91 years old, and the loneliest mistake I ever made looked like kindness. If someone had told me that when I was younger, I probably would have laughed. Kindness is supposed to bring people closer. It's supposed to make life easier. But some mistakes don't look like mistakes while you're making them. They look responsible. They look thoughtful. They even look loving. I spent decades believing I was doing the right thing, and by the time I understood what it was costing me, most of my life was already behind me. I don't tell you this because I'm looking for sympathy. At my age, I've learned that everybody carries regrets. Everybody has things they wish they had understood sooner. This just happens to be mine. My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 91 years old. I was married to the same man for 52 years. His name was Robert. He wasn't a perfect man. Lord knows neither of us was perfect. But we built a life together. A real life. The kind built one grocery trip, one mortgage payment, one family dinner at a time. When you're married that long, another person becomes part of the rhythm of your day. You don't think about it. You just live it. You wake up. You make coffee. You hear them moving around the house. You complain about the weather. You argue about little things. You tell the same stories over and over. Then one day they're gone, and the silence arrives. Nobody prepares you for that silence. Not really. People talk about grief. People talk about loss. But they don't talk much about silence. The kind that waits for you in every room. The kind that sits beside you at dinner. The kind that follows you to bed at night. For a while, I thought I was handling it well. I stayed busy. I paid my bills. I kept my garden alive. I went to church. I visited friends. I smiled when people asked how I was doing. And whenever somebody offered help, I gave them the same answer. I'm fine. I said it so often it became automatic. My children would call, "Mama, do you need anything?" "No, sweetheart, I'm fine." A neighbor would knock. "Margaret, I'm heading to the store. Need anything?" "No, thank you. I'm fine." A friend would invite me to lunch. "Maybe next time. I'm doing fine." At first, I genuinely believed it. I didn't want people worrying about me. My children had jobs, grandchildren, responsibilities. My friends had their own health problems, their own families, their own lives. Why should they spend time worrying about me? I grew up in a generation that valued independence. You handled your own problems. You didn't complain. You didn't make yourself somebody else's responsibility. You carried your weight. That was how I was raised. That was how I lived. And for most of my life, it served me well. The strange thing about beliefs is that they can keep helping you long after they stop being true. I didn't realize that. Not then. Every time I said, "I'm fine," I felt a little proud of myself. I thought I was being strong. I thought I was making life easier for everyone. I thought I was asking for less than other people. That felt honorable somehow. Looking back now, I can see how deeply I believed it. There was a woman at church named Betty. We had known each other nearly 30 years. Not best friends, but close enough. We sat together at events, shared meals, attended weddings and funerals. The kinds of friendships that quietly grow over decades. One afternoon, she called me. She wanted to know if I would like to join a small group from church for lunch. I thanked her and declined. A few weeks later, she called again. I declined again. Months later, she invited me to a birthday gathering. I declined that one too. Not because I didn't like Betty, not because I didn't want to see anyone. I simply didn't want people going out of their way for me. I thought staying home was easier. For everyone. Years pass strangely when you're older. They move fast and slow at the same time. One day feels long. 5 years disappear overnight. I kept living my life. I kept saying I was fine. I kept telling people not to worry about me. And gradually, something changed. So gradually that I almost missed it. The invitations became less frequent. The phone rang less often. The unexpected visits became rare. Nobody announced it. Nobody made a decision. There was no argument, no conflict, no dramatic moment. Life simply adjusted itself around my absence. At the time, I didn't understand that. I assumed people were busy, and they were. I assumed everyone was getting older. That was true too. I assumed friendships naturally faded with age. That felt reasonable. So I never questioned it. One winter afternoon, I found myself sitting by the front window, watching snow fall onto the street. I remember the exact chair, the exact blanket, the exact gray sky outside. Hours passed without a single conversation. The television was on, but I wasn't watching it. I was just listening to noise. Sometimes noise feels better than silence. I think many older people understand that. You leave the television running, not because you're interested, but because the house feels less empty. That afternoon, I realized something that unsettled me. I couldn't remember the last time somebody had stopped by unexpectedly. Not for a reason. Not because they needed paperwork signed. Not because it was a holiday. Just because they wanted to see me. The thought stayed with me. I tried pushing it away, but it stayed. A few weeks later, I was looking through old photographs. I've always loved photographs. They remind you how quickly ordinary moments become memories. I found pictures from church picnics, birthday lunches, volunteer events, little gatherings I had once attended regularly. There I was, laughing, standing beside people I hadn't spoken to in years, people who had once been part of my weekly life. I remember feeling a strange sadness, not dramatic sadness, quiet sadness, the kind that settles in your chest. I asked myself a question. When was the last time I called any of them? I couldn't remember. And then another question followed. When was the last time I accepted an invitation from any of them? That answer wasn't much better. For years, I had been waiting for people to keep reaching out, without realizing how often I had been stepping back. Still, I wasn't ready to see the whole truth. Not yet. I continued telling myself that everyone simply had their own lives. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. What I knew for certain was this. The world felt smaller than it once had. The circle around me felt quieter. And despite everything I told other people, despite every smile and every "I'm fine," there were nights when I sat alone in my living room and wished the phone would ring. Just once. Just so somebody could ask how my day had been. And one evening, as I sat there looking at that silent telephone, I found myself wondering something I had never allowed myself to wonder before. When did everyone stop calling? The older I get, the more I realize loneliness doesn't always arrive all at once. Sometimes it arrives quietly, one small absence at a time, a phone call that never comes, an invitation that stops arriving, a familiar face you haven't seen in months. Then one day you look around and realize your life has become much quieter than you ever intended. I wish I could tell you I noticed it immediately. I didn't. That's part of why it took me so long to understand. The changes were so gradual. A friend moved away. Another developed health problems. Someone lost a spouse. Someone became busy caring for grandchildren. Life happened. That seemed like a reasonable explanation. And maybe it was. At least partly. I remember one Saturday morning in particular. I woke up early. I've always been an early riser, even now. The sun had barely come up. The house was still. I made coffee and carried it to the kitchen table. There was nothing unusual about the morning. Nothing dramatic happened, but I remember looking at the empty chair across from me, the chair where Robert used to sit, and I realized I had eaten breakfast alone almost every day for more than 10 years. 10 years. The numbers startled me. Not because I hadn't known it, because I had never truly thought about it. Sometimes we adapt so completely that we stop questioning our circumstances. We simply accept them. That morning I found myself wondering what my life had become. Not in a sad way, just honestly. The days felt predictable. Wake up, make coffee, read, tidy the house, watch a little television, run an errand, prepare dinner, go to bed. Repeat. There is comfort in routine, but there can also be loneliness hiding inside it, especially when nobody shares it with you. A few weeks later, my daughter Emily called. She lives 3 states away. We speak often, not every day, but often enough. She asked how I was doing. I gave her my usual answer. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Then she paused. It was only a few seconds, but I still remember it. Finally, she said, "You always say that." I laughed. "Because I am." But after we hung up, her words stayed with me. "You always say that." I began wondering how many times people had heard those exact words from me over the years. Hundreds, perhaps, maybe thousands. Every offer, every invitation, every concern, every question. Always the same response. "I'm fine." The funny thing is that most of the time I wasn't lying. I really was fine, at least by my definition. I wasn't in danger. I wasn't sick. I wasn't starving. I could still manage my life. But being fine and being connected are not the same thing. I didn't understand that yet. Not fully. I just felt something shifting inside me. A quiet discomfort I couldn't quite explain. Around that same time, I ran into Betty at the grocery store. I hadn't seen her in months, maybe longer. We stood near the produce section talking. At first, the conversation felt normal. Then she said something that caught me off guard. She smiled and said, "Margaret, I stopped asking because I figured you preferred being left alone." She wasn't angry. She wasn't criticizing me. She was simply stating a fact. I smiled back, made a little joke, changed the subject. That's what I did back then. But on the drive home, her words replayed in my head. "I figured you preferred being left alone." The sentence bothered me more than I wanted to admit, because that wasn't how I saw myself. I didn't want to be left alone. I just didn't want to inconvenience people. Those felt like completely different things. Yet somehow they had led to the same result. That night, I sat in my living room thinking about all the people who had once been regular parts of my life. Friends, neighbors, church members, former co-workers, not enemies, not strangers. People I genuinely cared about, and I realized something uncomfortable. Most of them had reached out more than once. Many had reached out repeatedly. Lunch invitations, phone calls, holiday gatherings, community events. Small opportunities to stay connected. And most of the time, I had politely stepped back. Not because I didn't care, not because I disliked them, because I thought I was being considerate. I thought I was respecting their time. I thought adulthood meant handling things yourself. The strange thing is that nobody ever told me to do that. Nobody demanded it. It was simply a belief I carried, a belief that had followed me through most of my life. By then, another feeling had begun appearing more often. Not every day, but often enough. I would reach for the phone and realize there was nobody I felt comfortable calling just to talk. Not because people didn't exist. Because distance had quietly grown over the years. Distance has a way of becoming normal if you live with it long enough. You stop noticing it, until one day you do. One evening, I attended a memorial service for a woman from church. She had lived to be 94. A good life, a long life. The sanctuary was full. People filled nearly every pew. Friends, neighbors, family members, people sharing stories, laughing through tears, remembering her. I sat there listening, and something struck me. The people speaking weren't talking about how independent she had been. They weren't talking about how little she asked from others. They weren't celebrating how self-sufficient she was. They were talking about relationships, conversations, acts of kindness, friendships, moments shared together, connections. That was what remained. That was what people remembered. I drove home that afternoon with an unexpected heaviness in my chest. Not grief, not exactly. Something closer to regret, the kind that appears when you begin questioning assumptions you've carried for decades. For the first time, I wondered if I had mistaken distance for strength. And sitting alone in my living room later that night, I found myself staring at my silent phone once again. Only this time, a different question entered my mind. What if people didn't stop reaching out because they stopped caring? What if they stopped reaching out because I kept telling them I didn't need them? That question stayed with me for weeks. I didn't talk about it with anyone. At my age, you spend a lot of time thinking. Sometimes too much time. A single thought can sit beside you for days. You carry it from room to room. You wake up with it, you go to sleep with it, and that question kept returning. What if people didn't stop reaching out because they stopped caring? What if they stopped because I kept telling them I didn't need them? I wanted to dismiss the idea. Part of me resisted it, because if it was true, then I had spent years misunderstanding something important. Nobody likes discovering they've been wrong, especially about something they've believed most of their life. One afternoon, I decided to look through an old address book. Not because I was searching for answers. At least that's what I told myself. I was looking for a phone number. Or maybe I was looking for something else. The pages were worn, names written in ink. Some crossed out over the years. Some people had passed away. Some had moved. Some I hadn't spoken to in a very long time. As I turned the pages, memories started returning. Potluck dinners, church picnics, volunteer projects, birthday lunches, holiday gatherings, entire seasons of my life connected to people whose voices I hadn't heard in years. The strange thing was that none of those relationships had ended dramatically. There were no arguments, no betrayals, no broken friendships. Most of them had simply faded. And I began asking myself something uncomfortable. How many times had they reached out before the fading began? I couldn't remember exact numbers, but I remembered enough. Enough invitations, enough phone calls, enough attempts, enough opportunities, more than I had admitted to myself. A few days later, I decided to call an old friend named Helen. We had worked together at the library years ago, retired around the same time. For a while, we spoke regularly, then less often, then hardly at all. When she answered, she sounded genuinely surprised, not annoyed, not distant. Surprised. "Margaret?" she said. I laughed. Is that a good surprise or a bad one? A very good surprise. We ended up talking for nearly an hour. An entire hour. About grandchildren, health problems, books, the weather, the ridiculous things that happen when you're old. Nothing extraordinary, just conversation. But after we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time, because I couldn't remember the last conversation that had lasted an hour. What struck me most wasn't the conversation itself. It was how easy it felt. There had been no wall, no awkwardness, no resentment, no explanation needed, just two old friends talking, which made me wonder something else. If reconnecting was that easy, why had I waited so long? That question bothered me too. As the months passed, I started paying more attention, not to other people, to myself. I noticed how often I still declined invitations, how quickly I said no, how automatically I insisted everything was fine. Sometimes the words left my mouth before I even thought about them. A neighbor would invite me to join a community luncheon. No, thank you. Someone would suggest coffee. Maybe another time. Someone would offer help carrying something. I've got it. Every response sounded polite, reasonable, harmless. But now I was beginning to hear a pattern underneath them. A pattern I had never noticed before. One Sunday after church, several women gathered in the fellowship hall. Nothing special, just coffee and conversation. I almost left immediately. That had become my habit. Attend the service, smile, say hello, go home. Simple, predictable, comfortable. But Helen spotted me. She waved me over. I hesitated. Then I joined them. Most of the conversation was ordinary. Family updates, health concerns, stories about grandchildren. But something happened that afternoon. Not a dramatic moment, not the kind of thing anyone else would remember. Yet I still think about it. One of the women mentioned she had been struggling after a recent surgery. Immediately, the others started offering support. One offered rides. Another offered meals. Someone else offered to check in during the week. Nobody seemed embarrassed. Nobody seemed ashamed. Nobody acted like accepting help made her weak. They simply cared. And she allowed them to. I remember driving home afterward feeling strangely unsettled, because I realized I could not imagine myself doing what she had done. If I had needed help, I would have hidden it, minimized it, explained it away, pretended I was managing. The realization made me uncomfortable, not because of her, because of me. That evening I stood in my kitchen washing dishes and thinking about how many years I had spent trying to be easy to love, easy to manage, easy to ignore. That last thought surprised me. I wasn't trying to be ignored, of course not, but something about it felt true. The quieter I became, the easier it was for people to assume I needed nothing. The less I shared, the less there was to respond to. The less I participated, the less connected I felt. Still, I wasn't ready to see the whole picture. Not yet. Life continued. Months passed. Then came the moment that affected me more than any of the others. A woman from church passed away. Her name was Eleanor. She had been widowed even longer than I had, lived alone, had health problems, needed help with many things. By every measure, her life should have been smaller than mine. At least that was what I assumed. I attended the gathering after her funeral. The room was full. People shared stories, one after another. A young mother talked about how Eleanor had encouraged her during difficult years. A retired teacher described weekly phone calls they had shared for over a decade. A neighbor recalled countless evenings spent talking on the porch. Someone else spoke about rides Eleanor had arranged when people needed them. Another person described meals she delivered. Another described advice she gave. Another described friendship, connection, presence. Again and again, the stories kept coming, and as I listened, a painful realization began forming. Eleanor had accepted help, but she had also accepted connection. She had remained involved in people's lives. She had allowed people into hers. Nobody remembered her because she was independent. They remembered her because she was present. I drove home with tears in my eyes, not because of Eleanor, not entirely, because something about her life was forcing me to examine my own. When I arrived home, I sat alone in my living room. The house was quiet. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Outside, The streetlights glowed through the window, and for the first time in many years, I allowed myself to ask a question I had been avoiding. Had I spent so much energy trying not to burden anyone that I had slowly disappeared from their lives? The answer hadn't arrived yet, but for the first time, I was afraid I already knew where it was leading. The answer hadn't arrived yet, but for the first time, I was afraid I already knew where it was leading. A few days after Eleanor's funeral, I found myself sitting on my front porch. It was one of those quiet afternoons that seem to happen more often when you're old. No appointments, no errands, no plans, just time. The neighborhood was peaceful. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Children rode bicycles past the corner. A woman watered flowers across the road. Nothing unusual. Nothing important. And maybe that is why I finally saw it. The realization didn't come during a crisis. It didn't arrive in a dramatic conversation. Nobody confronted me. Nobody explained anything. It appeared in an ordinary moment, the kind of moment most people forget. I was watching a young mother walk her little boy home from school. He was talking nonstop, arms moving, head turning, excited about something that had happened during his day. The mother listened patiently. Sometimes she responded, sometimes she simply smiled. But she was present, completely present. And suddenly, I thought about all the years people had tried to be present with me. Friends, neighbors, family, church members. People who called, people who invited, people who checked in, people who asked. And I thought about how often I had answered with the same words. I'm fine. The words echoed in my mind. Not once, not twice, hundreds of times, maybe thousands. Then something shifted. For the first time, I stopped hearing those words as kindness and started hearing them as a wall, a polite wall, a respectable wall, a well-intentioned wall, but a wall all the same. I sat there for a long time, long enough for the shadows to change, long enough for the afternoon to become evening. And slowly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Betty hadn't stopped calling because she didn't care. Helen hadn't drifted away because she lost interest. People hadn't abandoned me. They had simply listened to me. They believed what I kept telling them, that I was fine, that I needed nothing, that I preferred handling things myself, that I didn't require much from anyone. And after hearing that message for years, they adjusted accordingly. The painful truth was not that people had stopped reaching out. The painful truth was that I had spent decades teaching them not to. When that realization finally settled into my heart, I cried. Not because anyone had wronged me, not because I felt angry, because I felt sad. Sad for all the years I misunderstood what connection actually requires. Sad for all the opportunities I quietly turned away. Sad for all the relationships that might have grown deeper if I had simply opened the door a little wider. The hardest part was realizing my intentions had been good. I wasn't trying to push people away. I wasn't trying to isolate myself. I thought I was being considerate. I thought love meant asking for less. I thought strength meant needing less. I thought independence was the highest virtue. Nobody had ever taught me otherwise, at least not directly. Yet there I was, at 91 years old, seeing something I wish I had understood decades earlier. Connection requires participation, not perfection, not independence, participation. People cannot stay close if they are never allowed in. That realization didn't change my life overnight. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no grand transformation, no movie ending, no miraculous reunion. Life rarely works that way. But small things began changing, very small things. The next time Emily called and asked how I was doing, I hesitated. Then I told her the truth. Not all of it, just a little. I told her I had been feeling lonely lately. There was silence for a moment. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Mama, I've been worried about that for years." Years. The word stayed with me. Years. My daughter had been worried, and I had spent years convincing her there was nothing to worry about. Not because I wanted to deceive her, because I thought I was helping her. We talked longer that day than we usually did. Nothing extraordinary, just honestly. When we hung up, I felt lighter. Not because my loneliness had disappeared, because I had finally shared it. A week later, Helen invited me to lunch. Normally, I would have found a reason to decline. This time I said yes. I remember sitting across from her in a small restaurant near the library where we once worked. We talked for nearly 2 hours. At one point she laughed and said, "I forgot how much I missed this." Those words touched me more than she probably realized, because I had missed it too. I simply hadn't admitted it. Gradually, I started saying yes more often. Not always. I'm still 91. I still enjoy my quiet mornings. I still value independence. But independence no longer feels like the only thing worth protecting. Some Sundays I stay after church. Sometimes I join conversations instead of leaving immediately. Sometimes I call people first. That one surprised me. For years, I waited for others to call. Now I occasionally pick up the phone myself. And do you know what I discovered? Most people are happy to hear from you. They're just as uncertain as you are. They're just as busy, just as distracted, just as human. Many of them were waiting too, waiting for someone else to make the first move. The loneliness didn't disappear completely. I don't think loneliness ever disappears completely. Not after you've lost people you love. Not after you've lived long enough. There are still evenings when the house feels quiet. Still mornings when I miss Robert. Still moments when I wish life had unfolded differently. That is part of growing older. But loneliness no longer feels like a mystery. I understand it differently now, and understanding changes everything. The older I get, the more I believe people misunderstand strength. When I was younger, I thought strength meant carrying everything yourself, never asking, never needing, never burdening. Now I think strength looks different. I think strength is allowing people to see you honestly, allowing them to care, allowing them to matter, allowing yourself to matter too. If I could sit beside my younger self for 1 hour, I would not tell her to work harder. I would not tell her to save more money. I would not tell her to worry less. I would tell her something much simpler. I would tell her not to confuse independence with connection, because they are not the same thing. You can be independent and deeply connected. You can be capable and still need people. You can be strong and still accept help. It took me most of my life to understand that, and maybe that is why I wanted to share this story. Not because I have all the answers. I certainly don't. After 91 years, I'm still learning things, still discovering blind spots, still finding truths I somehow missed. But this one feels important, because I know I'm not the only person who has said, "I'm fine," when what they really meant was, "I don't want to trouble anyone." I know I'm not the only person who has convinced themselves that staying quiet was kindness, and I know I'm not the only person who looked around one day and wondered where everyone went. The answer is not always simple. Sometimes people leave. Sometimes life changes. Sometimes loss is unavoidable. But sometimes the distance grows because nobody realizes there is still a door open, not even us. These days, when someone asks how I'm doing, I still say I'm fine sometimes. Old habits are stubborn, but every now and then, I tell the truth instead. And whenever I do, something remarkable happens. Not a miracle, just a conversation, a connection, a moment of honesty. A reminder that none of us were meant to carry life entirely alone. At 91, that may be the most valuable thing I've learned. Not that people abandoned me, not that the world became colder, not that friendship disappeared. Only that connection requires a little courage, the courage to let people in. Before I go, I'd love to hear from you. How old are you, and where are you listening from today? Leave a comment and let me know. I read more of them than you might imagine. And if these reflections speak to you, I'd be honored if you subscribed and joined me again. We still have many things to talk about. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself and take care of the people who keep reaching for you. One day, you may realize how precious that reaching truly was.